Okay. Good morning after a very tiring evening. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to go through, I went through a lit review looking at the terms accreditation and continuous quality improvement. And so I searched the databases at MacEwan, all of ours that had related to health, and came up with some what I think are kind of interesting articles. First of all, what was really obvious about a number of the articles I read is that they tended to refer to accreditation as being like dentistry. Okay, it's something you dread, but you get it over with, and generally the results are pretty good, right? You prevent future pain, you improve your maintenance, at least for a while, but in terms of what Sandra has said, really you should keep up your flossing, right? Okay, now there's been a question, asked about accreditation for a long time in terms of, is it a carrot or a stick? And there was one program that a few years ago went through an accreditation process with an Asian accrediting body and also an American accrediting body, and found that these two accrediting bodies looked at very different things, right? The Asian accrediting body wanted benchmarks to be met, and that's what they were looking for. Where the American body was looking at, are these guys trying to improve continuously, right? So, a small mercy is we have one accrediting body, right? and so we, have a fairly well-defined, set of what we go through. So anyways, in terms of us being, what are we? Is the, is PIAC more of a carrot or more of a stick kind of a process? And what we think is we've got a balance going where we do have benchmarks and we do need to meet certain things, certain requirements, but also the feedback that's given to programs is hopefully going to help that program improve or set up a process where they see to their own improvement, right? Hence the, progress reports. Okay, now, we know that assessment drives learning, right? Students are always asking us, will this be on the exam? Do I need to learn this? If they miss a class, they want to know if they've missed anything important, i.e. anything that's going to be on the exam. But we also know that from measurements that accreditation drives what we do as well, right? It drives content, format, and perspective, right? It drives what's in our programs, how we structure it over the course of the program, and then our perspectives. And I know something at MacEwan a number of years ago, we really had very little pediatric content, and that was because we had very little hiring happening in pediatrics. And then we, in talking to other people, I realized that in fact, their graduates were being hired into pediatrics. And so we started including more pediatric content. We started looking for, pediatric placements, and our students did start getting hired into pediatrics, okay? And so I think with accreditation, because we're looking at, how things are going across the country, sometimes we're asked for our programs to meet standards that don't look like they really apply to our situation, but they apply across the country. And we're looking to graduate people who can be employed across the country. So sometimes accreditation does drive how we do things because we're all trying to meet, a similar output, a similar graduate. Now, a question that was asked when accreditation kind of first, became popularized. So back in the 70s, there was a major article that I wound up going back to read because so many articles referred to it, published in 1978, where the authors were worried that accreditation would make us all the same, and that programs wouldn't be able to develop niches within their content or their graduates. And so what has essentially come out of that is that programs realize that accreditation drives a certain percentage of what we do, but because we have faculty who have particular areas of expertise, things get highlighted within programs in ways that they don't happen necessarily in other programs. And I know that one of the instructors who teaches in our program is really big on, balance with seniors. Right, Cassie? So our graduates are great on balance, right? Just, and we've got that feedback from fieldwork is, that they have a depth of knowledge in that area, and it's great. And I know that probably others of you have niche areas where you consider your graduates to be particularly good, right? Hands up. Yeah, okay, good. Okay, so in essence then, accreditation should lead to a better prepared graduate, greater success on credentialing exams, which we don't have yet, better prepared for practice, and more likely to protect the consumer from harm. Okay, so that's how nursing programs, medical programs, all sorts of health programs look at accreditation, is in terms of protecting the consumer from harm. Medical accreditation's ultimate purpose is an improvement in the quality of healthcare provision. Now, medical academics rate accreditation as being very, very important. However, there's no evidence to indicate that accredited programs produce better doctors than non-accredited programs. And graduates of accredited programs, when surveyed, a very small percentage of them had indicated that their program had prepared them to write their credentialing exams. The vast majority of them undertook other measures. They went to special tutorials, they subscribed to online programs, they did, some of them, an exhaustive kind of list of other things outside of their education through these accredited programs in order to be able to pass their exam. So, now, it's really medical education that has driven the accreditation of most health programs. Okay, back in 1910, there was a report called the Flexner Report that caused major reforms in health education for physicians. And what they insisted, and this is frightening, is that they have science as part of their curriculum. And prior to, this time, a lot of schools were still teaching the, bleeding and purging and, the stuff we now know is really harmful to people. And so bringing science into the medical sort of wealth of knowledge that physicians started to gain at this time is thought to be, part of the reason why lifespan doubled in the 1900s. Is doctors started to help people rather than kill them. Now also in the late 1880s, there was a huge movement of science into their body of knowledge. People like Pasteur and so on. Germ theory didn't actually gain acceptance in medicine until the late 1880s. And then it wasn't until 1910 that there was an insistence that doctors use microscopes so that they could all see the germs. The medical students could see the germs for themselves and know that germ theory was true. Okay. They've come a long way, haven't they? Okay, now who can recognize this guy? Let's see, Grace. Yes! Good for you, Karen. Well, sadly, that's only a little bit true. So in the mid-century then, the physicians' education again took a big turn when they started using problem-based learning. And that's really what most of us are familiar with in our education, is we're told about a patient and what sort of symptoms they have. And so what do you think is wrong? What are you going to look for? And so on. Because up to that point, medical education had been, if somebody has tuberculosis, you give them this pill and tell them to pray, right? So it was very, very prescriptive. Whereas they started actually solving problems then in the 1950s and learning how to really diagnose the huge array of diseases that they were now able to identify with sort of enhanced tools. And it's considered that currently we're going through another revolution. This revolution is based on the fallout from the knowledge explosion, right? What we have seen the last couple of decades is that the amount of information available to us overwhelms what we could possibly take in, right? Nobody can be an expert anymore. So with continuous quality improvement then, what we are acknowledging is that we are producing graduates who are a cog in a wheel. People work in teams now. Nobody works in isolation. And so we have to graduate people who are have relatively the same capabilities so that they can move into this health system that is very, very complex, and people can trust that they have certain capabilities, right? We can't be producing people who are, have no pediatric skills such as we used to have. We have to have people with, the same set of skills so that they can go anywhere in the country and do their job. And what we're also aware is that we have to keep upgrading what our students do because the knowledge explosion isn't backing off. It's not going to stop. So we have to keep continuously figuring out what are our graduates expected to do now. What's coming down the pipe. Okay, so accreditation can help mature a discipline into a profession by getting rid of dubious programs. And I don't know if you remember Don Burnett talking about programs in church basements. Right, okay, so essentially, we've eliminated them. Encouraging both a formative and summative process. And so as Sandra talked about, you can measure something, sort of stop time, this is how the program is right now. But really we want to have a formative process happening where we're continuously looking at what do our graduates need to know and adding that to our curriculum. We've increased accountability by the inclusion of accreditation outcomes into the curriculum, right? We now look at those things as we go along. And we're motivated in terms of CQI, in terms of staying current in practice, and also in andragogy, right? Which is a word I never know how to pronounce, andragogy. And so we look at the process. How well are we educating graduates, and do programs look at how well they're educating graduates? Okay, so accreditation can help mature a discipline into a profession also by supporting transportability and articulation to other institutions. Excuse me. And so we at MacEwan right now are developing a degree, and Cassie is, and not quite single-handedly, but and so one of the things that's being discussed is, if people have graduates from accredited programs, meaning that they're similar to MacEwan, can those people then go into the third and fourth year of that degree as well? Accreditation requires educational institutions to have the necessary management controls and student support services. And also, and this was impressed upon me by Sandra the very first time I went out as a program reviewer, is that she sat down with the program at the outset and said, is there anything that you need? Because we can help you get what you need. We can put it in the report as a recommendation, or this is how possibly you might want to address this problem that you have. So we can give you power to get what the resources that you need for your program. So. Okay, now this is just another look at that same Plan, Do, Study, Act, and it's in American nursing accreditation. This is becoming increasingly popular as a requirement for them to undertake. There are variations on the theme, and again, Sandra, went through that in terms of exactly what format or what sort of letters they're looking at in terms of rolling out their process. The U.S., Public Health Accreditation Board has published fairly extensively on their use of CQI activities. The greatest benefit to successfully embed CQI in accreditation is the benefit derived from faculty engagement. okay, or the engagement provided by employee engagement. So if people get excited about accreditation, then the institution, whether it's education or a health institution, things tend to move very positively. And the greatest barrier, of course, is when people don't become engaged. And then the process is drudgery. Now, the Accreditation Council for Pharmacy Education noted that institutions get their greatest improvements over the first 4 accreditation cycles. Okay, so we've got a few years ahead of us, right? and then the benefits slow. And so some accrediting bodies are starting to look at that and extend out sort of after a body or after a program has been accredited 4 times. Then instead of being accredited every 6 years, they might be accredited every 8 years. And they take on the process themselves of CQI, and they just submit reports once a year. So that's something for down the road. Yeah, we're a ways away. Yeah. Okay, now I also read a number of reports about affirmative action and how the move in a current trend, it seems, in accrediting bodies is to bring in some aspect of affirmative action, recognizing that employers can only employ who we graduate. And so where there's affirmative action being asked for, in South Africa, which I'm going to refer to in a minute, there's a big move to have a certain percentage of Black Africans graduate from programs or be actually hired into institutions. And so, of course, that's backed up into the educational institutions. They have to accept a certain number of Black students into their programs. And so this is a bit of a trend, not just in Africa, but also in Europe. They're looking to diversify their the people who are coming into educational programs. Oh, and I was just going to mention one article that did make reference to, and this is an Alberta statistic. A Canadian male with Aboriginal status is 6 times more likely to be admitted to prison than to a post-secondary institution. So that's kind of what currently is, happening in Canada that in terms of CQI is. Of course, we're looking at the Truth and Reconciliation Report, and how is that going to be applied? And so that's just something to watch for. I'm not sure that we don't have a plan, but maybe we'll need a plan at some point. So South Africa then, what I was going to mention about South Africa is that, one of the articles I read talked about an accrediting body that looked at institutions delivering master's degrees in educational leadership. Okay, so educational leadership master's degrees. And the people on that accrediting body and on peer review teams, the Black Africans preferred education to focus on problem solving, whereas the white South Africans wanted to focus on knowledge, sort of more of a European model. The Black Africans were looking at more of an American model. Most peer review teams they found to be largely dysfunctional, with the reviewers often in disagreement. Peer review training, their peer review training manual, includes warnings about being overcritical, arbitrary, self-serving, irresponsible, arrogant, inappropriate, biased, sloppy, subjective, and secretive. Okay, so when we think that we might have problems on peer review teams, we have nothing. Yeah. Okay, and I'll mention too, I at a conference last year met an OT from South Africa who talked about the problems they were having with having Black students come into their program, and that what they had to accept was that these people who were coming into their 4-year bachelor's degree programs were probably going to take 5, 6, or 7 years to complete the program. Would require extra tutorials and all kinds of other assistance to get through the program. And it was not due to any sort of lack of intellect, it was due to a lack of basic education. So they came into the program unprepared. And In the BRIC countries, in terms of engineering, they have a very similar problem. They have two levels of educational institutions educating engineers. They have sort of kind of the high, quality ones that everybody wants to get into, and then they have the programs that, in fact, 80% of engineering students actually make it into. And they graduate quite different graduates. The sort of higher tier programs, the professors there are doing research, and the students get to do all kinds of interesting things in terms of leaving these countries to go do other projects and so on. Whereas a fairly basic engineering education is provided to the people in these sort of lower tier schools. And what they have found is that when they look back at the education of the people in the lower tier schools, is that they have an inferior education rate back to grade 1. A lot of stop-outs. They were educated in schools where a lot of students never complete high school. Okay, and so that's essentially the problem then that we have in Canada now too. And there were a few articles about how do we educate people, Aboriginal students, to enter into the workforce, because one of the recommendations from the Truth and Reconciliation Report was an increase in the number of Aboriginal health providers. And of course, unless we're educating them, they're not going to be able to hire them. So I think I'll just kind of leave it at that with a thought for what do we do in the future. And as I said, I'm retiring in 2 years, so someone else can take that. Okay, so I'm turning this over to Leslie.